Hello and welcome to Hardtalk India. My guest today is one of the leading filmmakers of contemporary India, and the stories he takes are usually challenging and often controversial. None more so than the central character of his latest film, Subhash Chandra Bose. The film, Bose the Forgotten Hero, is a challenging film that's creating controversy in India. It's about the last years of the legendary freedom fighter, and it doesn't shy away from tackling the controversies that disturb many Indians. Here to talk about the film and, of course, about Subhash Chandra Bose is the film's director, Shyam Benegal. Mr. Benegal, let me ask you a blunt question. Do you intend this film as a tribute to Bose, or is it in a sense a stripping away of the myth, showing the man as he actually was?
Well, actually it's a tribute to him. Because I do believe that there was considerable value to what he did. There are all sorts of controversial things, like, say, for instance, his hoping to get help from somebody like Hitler. And later he did get some help from Tojo, for instance, when he took charge of the INA in Southeast Asia. But I also feel that if you look at the history of that time, particularly for a country like India, which is a colonized place, I'm thinking now of the 1930s, for instance. In 1930s, what for the Indian freedom fighter, if he looked outside of India, what for him was the most important things that were taking the world ahead? One was the Soviet Union, the other was Germany, strangely enough, in the 30s. And the Soviet Union, all the things that it was supposed to be doing, etc., was impressing a lot of political figures in our country, nationalist political figures. And similarly, I think some were also very impressed with what Hitler was doing.
Except for the fact that you call the film The Forgotten Hero, and I must point out to you that the Bose that emerges from your film is anything but heroic, except in his dreams and his ambitions. What remains in the mind when you walk out is his defeats, his disappointments, and his failures.
Yes, but his failure, of course, there is his failure. If you think in terms of whether the INA won at the end of it, no, obviously not. Also, it started very late. There were so many, all those problems are there in the film. But the important thing is, that was a failure that led to a victory.
Well, before we come to that victory, the film begins, in a sense, with his bad judgment. He puts his trust in Hitler, although he doesn't believe in Hitler's principles and policies, and as your film suggests, he ends up, for almost 2 years, the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. A critically bad decision-making.
No, I don't think so, because if you look at it from another point of view, say, for instance, when he went to Germany, he wasn't planning to go to Germany. He ended up in Germany. But the important thing for him was, because he had this one thing which he went on and on and on constantly, that Britain was ruling India with the help of an army of Indians. And he needed to see that these people would be disaffected, not be loyal to the British, but to the country, to the nation India.
Except that he didn't really succeed in forging anything of that legion that he attempted to create in Germany. It was with the Japanese that he created the Indian National Army, but then...
Because Hitler really didn't take him seriously at all.
Quite right, Hitler didn't take him seriously.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that when he goes to the Japanese and puts himself in their trust, they don't take the Indian National Army seriously either. In fact, your film shows that they don't even treat it with equal respect.
They didn't, but it was like he was chasing an impossible dream. And he almost made it possible.
Isn't that my point? His dream is heroic, but his achievements are often very shallow.
But it didn't seem that way.
To him?
No, after he left the scene.
Well,
because after he left the scene, look at what happened in India.
Well, yes, but you're jumping the story. Look at the film as it shows the years 43 onwards, when the Indian National Army, under Japanese tutelage, is attempting to fight. Your depiction of the INA is a sort of ragtag bunch, more Dad's army than respectable fighting force.
No, it was a fighting force, as it did. It did fight. You see a whole lot of battles in the film.
A whole lot of defeats.
No, not necessarily. In the beginning, there There are all sorts of successes in the Arakan front.
But Mount Popa was a major defeat. And before
Mount
that,
Popa was the final defeat.
and before that, on the Chindwin River,
Yes.
your film actually suggests that the INA was defeated by decoy dummy soldiers, wooden men, men made of wood, I should say, in boats. And it looks almost laughable that they could be defeated. And yet, if that's the truth, it's not heroic.
No, no, that's not the truth of it. The truth is that it was defeated because of air power. Allies had air power. They had nothing else. They were fighting with small arms.
Except that the most memorable moment in your film is as the mist clears,
Yeah.
these boats appear,
Yeah.
and there are literally wooden
It
decoys.
is true.
And the INA is busy firing
That's what
at
Slim
them.
had
and
sent. I mean, we know that General Slim had sent those decoys, and also to find out where these guys were.
And the
then
fact that
finally,
the
of course,
INA is firing at decoys makes the INA look and feel laughable.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, maybe you're the only person who looked at that whole sequence that way.
And then, of course, there is the final moment, right at the end of the film, when defeat and capture and surrender are imminent. Bose, according to your film, doesn't stand by his soldiers as any real general would. Under advice from his commanders, he seems to be more concerned about his safety and ensuring that he's not taken captive.
No, I don't think that is what it was. The idea was that he demobbed. He got rid of the. I mean, paid everybody. He didn't want them to be captured. He paid the army. He sent them back
But
to
he
their
left
civilian life.
major commanders to be captured by the British, whilst himself leaving the scene.
No, the major commanders were in fact imprisoned even earlier, much earlier than the point at which I've shown.
But he didn't
when he
stand
leaves.
to the end with his soldiers. He
No,
left.
he was planning. I mean, he was planning another whole system of events, which is what he was trying.
So at best, he ran away to fight another day.
Yes,
But run away he
left
did.
Well, I wouldn't use the word run away. He left the battlefield to fight another day.
Do you see
I'll
why?
put it that way.
Do you see why I began the way I did by asking you if this is a tribute or
Yeah.
a stripping away of the myth? Because the Bose that emerges from your film is so different to the Bose of legend and folklore.
Well, you see, the Bose of legend, the Bose of myth, is someone who may not have any human qualities whatsoever. He'd be made to look absolutely godlike.
And yours is a very human Bose.
I personally think mine is a very human Bose. What is more, he's not only human, he has human strengths and human failings.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the most poignant moments of the film is the relationship with his Austrian secretary, who then became his wife, Emily Schenkel.
Yes.
He loved her, he had a daughter by her, but he never had the courage to acknowledge that relationship in public.
He did acknowledge that before he left,
In a letter,
in a letter to his brother.
but never in public, never when he was with her.
Never when he was with her, for a very simple reason, because the mixed marriages were not allowed in
So he
Germany
was a
at the
prisoner
time.
of prejudice and tradition.
He was a prisoner of prejudice not in his own country. He was not even in his own country at the time.
Except that we can't
He
be
was
sure
in-
whether it was the reaction of the Germans that stopped him acknowledging the relationship, or his fear that Indians, not just his family, but very possibly the wider Indian nation, would not have accepted the relationship. He was probably scared of both.
That is, of course, I mean, you can interpret it any which way you want, because there is nothing, I mean, there's nothing that you can study in which it will tell you one or another thing clearly.
Let me quote to you
Yeah.
what Sharmila Bose, his great niece, has
Yes.
written in the Economic and Political Weekly this January. She says, Bose displayed remarkable cowardice in concealing his relationship with Emily Schenkel from friends, family, and the public he claimed to serve for 11 years till his death.
That is what she's saying is from 1937 onwards. From 1937 onwards, which we don't know, because now it appears that he was probably married in 1937. We don't know.
And he
but one
hid
thing we
this
know,
fact till he died. It was only a letter delivered perhaps posthumously to his brother that made the family aware that Bose was not just married, but had a daughter.
yes,
In a sense, Sharmila Bose's great niece isn't wrong. It is cowardice, isn't it?
I wouldn't say that. I don't think so at all, because it's a question of what were the strategies he was adopting. What were the kind of things he was working towards? You know, I mean, there's so many factors, because he had a certain kind of a public image, and he probably wanted to maintain that kind of public image. There were so many things.
You mean wife and family was secondary to the mission?
Well, that even in the film, it comes through.
In a sense, that's also true of his relationship, is it not, with both Gandhi on the one hand and Hitler on the other? Gandhi thought that means were as important as ends. Both thought the end mattered most.
No, his end was not as wide as Gandhi's end. Gandhi wanted to change the world. All Bose wanted to do was to get freedom for his country.
And he was prepared to go to any extent to do it.
Well, as he says, you know, he'd shake hands with the devil.
Except that
if it was
this policy
necessary.
of my enemy's enemy is my friend made him at times look almost like an opportunist. I mean, he was a staunch socialist, proud to be an Indian, yet he allied with Hitler, who was a fascist, and who, at least in his writings, had been disparaging of the Indian people.
Which he brought, I mean, but it's minuted that he brought this up with Hitler himself.
But still
so
put himself
he was in that sense a very fearless person.
Fearless, no doubt,
And
as
his
an
position,
individual.
he made his position quite clear.
Fearless as an individual, I concede that.
Yeah.
But an opportunist in terms of strategy?
Well, you know, I mean, when you say opportunist, I mean, that kind of labeling, I'm not quite sure I would agree. Because, you know, from hindsight, when you look at people like that, you might consider this to be opportunist. But look at the options available to him during the time of war. He is also completely alone. He's alone. When he leaves India, he's alone. He is also bereft of any credentials, because he's no longer part of the Congress party, he's not the president, nothing, he's got nothing. And alone, I mean, to me, it's a story of this incredible journey, you know, which he himself termed as a journey into unknown.
You're suggesting that he's making the best of very difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. He's making the best of the most difficult circumstances he's put in, and eventually...
And that, in a sense, excuses what looks like opportunism today.
Well, if you put it that way, but I don't agree with that, because, you know, it doesn't quite work like that, because, you know, you might say, in politics there are a lot of things that you might consider to be opportunist, but, you know, but there are certain circumstances under which you will take certain kinds of decisions.
Obviously, a lot of people disagree with the line that I'm putting, and
Yes.
yet what I'm suggesting to you is that this line, that Bose was a great man with fundamental human weaknesses, particularly with regard to his wife, a great freedom fighter, but an opportunist at the same time. A man who put together the noble Indian National Army, but an army that won very few victories, and in your movie looks more ragtag and dad's army than fighting force. That is one line that is visible to be interpreted and seen in your film. Does it worry you that many people may come to the same conclusion?
No, I don't think so. I think what will come through is that here was a genuine hero. And like all heroes, he was in many ways a tragic hero. You know,
Often more tragic than heroic.
Well, no, you know, heroes are normally tragic.
It's part of the same thing.
Yes.
Is that in a sense why 60 years after he was last seen, Bose remains a figure that mesmerizes the Indian people?
He does because of the way he went about it. The fact that he was fighting against all odds. He suddenly recreates in your mind an extraordinary kind of almost classical way, you know, man against the elements kind of figure. You know, he becomes like all those great figures of Greek mythology.
So
even,
what
you know,
he
like
stood for is more important than the man. He's a symbol in a sense.
He becomes a symbol. Therefore he becomes a symbol.
And therefore people identify with him.
Absolutely.
And romanticize him.
Absolutely.
And excuse him his failings.
And excuse him his failings.
And for some, those failings become endearing because they make him human.
Absolutely.
Complete in a sense.
Yes.
Let's talk a bit about yourself. This, of course, is your latest film. In a sense, perhaps many would say your magnum opus. But you made your mark in the 70s with movies like Ankur, Manthan, Nishan. Those were films that were considered to be part of parallel cinema at the time. Have you moved a long way in your own eyes from that point to now?
Well, you move along with the times, you know. I mean, times change, and also your approach to things change. I mean, the equations are never the same. You know, equations keep changing. I mean, social equations are constantly changing. And therefore, if you are concerned, interested in the environment, in the society around you,
You develop with it.
you develop with it. So you're part of that process.
You've developed, of that there can be no doubt. But do you think parallel cinema impacted on mainstream cinema in the same way? Has it left an imprint on it?
No, it didn't leave an imprint in that sense, but then a lot of it was co-opted into the mainstream.
Some of your best creations that you launched, Shabana Azmi, Smita Patil, Nasiruddin Shah, Om Puri, were all, to use your word, co-opted, weren't they?
No, they weren't co-opted. I would think that the arena of functioning broadened, obviously, and had to broaden because
But
they
to
came very
function
capable
in the
people.
but to function in that new arena, they had to accept the values, the storylines, and the style of mainstream.
Yes, but you know, when you're a professional, you do a lot of things. I don't think actors necessarily need to be, you know, they have to be true to their art more than be true to the story that is being presented to them.
Would I be right in saying that parallel cinema gave Hindi cinema some of its best actors, the ones we've talked about,
And technicians.
and technicians?
Yes.
But what mainstream cinema never really got from parallel cinema was a storyline that had credibility. Many people complain that mainstream Hindi cinema has no real connection with reality as we know it.
It doesn't have connection with reality in the sense of the stories they tell. But on that, once you have said that, they have the ability to bring in a lot of topicality, a lot of what's happening around, become part of either the conversation or a situation in the story and so on and so forth. And that's how it sort of, you know, it's taken elements of what I personally think is folk cultures, you know.
But
and
why
folk
is
arts.
it
You
not
have that sort of thing happening constantly. And that happens in the normal, traditional, mainstream Indian cinema.
But why is mainstream Indian cinema not more real in the sort of stories it tells? Is it because reality is too difficult for poor Indians to deal with? Because in their lives there's enough hardship, they don't want to see it in their entertainment?
Well, that's the usual kind of argument. But I don't go by that. I mean, that's something that's said for more for convenience, I think.
So is it bad script writing?
It's no. I think it's essentially that, you know, we don't have a tradition. Like, say, for instance, in the West, because of the Renaissance and so on and so forth, there's a whole process of how the arts developed. And in that, this whole business of, you know, realism, the real, taking from the real, the naturalism, realism, all these concepts which you can see in the Western arts, in European arts,
Realism as such is missing here.
is missing because that's not part of our tradition.
Is that also one reason why Indian cinema tries to be so many things together? Comedy, history, romance, tragedy, sometimes even a ghost story.
Absolutely. It has to be everything. It has to have a little of everything.
Is that because that's the best way of spreading one's bets as a director?
Absolutely. That's the best way to spread, you know, you want to get the largest number of people to come and see what you
Largest number of people, or you want to ensure that you don't fail? Is it an absence of courage as opposed to...
When you say largest number of people, it's the same thing. You know, if you have the largest number of people coming to see your work, it means that you're not likely to fail.
Is that a strength in a Hindi film director, or is that a weakness?
I wouldn't think that this has anything to do with strength or weakness. It's just, it so happens that it's that kind of a form.
It's the way they are.
It's the way they are, and then more importantly, I think what happens there is that you can have within the format, within this particular format of traditional Indian cinema, you can have exceptional directors. I mean, there have been directors like Manmohan Desai, for instance, who are exceptional directors.
And he produced an exceptional actor in Amitabh Bachchan.
Absolutely.
But leaving, say, Amitabh aside, how do you rate Indian Hindi film actors? Many of them have actually come to the profession because their parents were actors before them, or because it's another stepping stone from the world of modeling and glamour. Very few have trained and gone through drama school.
Well, but then, you know, I mean, you will always find, but the biggest new star on the horizon after Amitabh Bachchan,
Shah Rukh.
And Shah Rukh doesn't have any family connections. You know, he didn't have any family connections. He probably had some training with Barry John and people like that when he came into
Shah Rukh,
acting.
of course, raises a different sort of dilemma. Shah Rukh is always Shah Rukh, regardless of what role he plays. He's more a star than an actor.
Yes, of course. But then, you know, that's what every actor wants to be. He wants to be a star. I don't believe that all actors want to remain actors. Many of them want to be stars, because once you're a star, you're somebody that whatever you do, they will come to see you for the star you are, because not for the performance that you're going to give, because the performance of a particular role is not important. The role has to become you.
So
you don't become the role.
Shah Rukh, in a sense, is the Tom Cruise of Indian cinema rather than the Dustin Hoffman.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because Dustin Hoffman becomes the role. Al Pacino becomes the role. Robert De Niro becomes the role. Tom Cruise doesn't. Tom Cruise remains Tom Cruise.
And in a sense, this is one of the distinguishing features between parallel cinema as it was in the 70s and 80s and mainstream cinema today. Parallel cinema had actors, mainstream cinema has stars.
Yes, absolutely.
And because they are stars, you also have these compendium storylines because they project the star rather than the reality an actor needs for his trade and craft.
Absolutely. No, altogether. I totally agree with what you're saying. You see, and also, but then don't forget that the star is a magnet. You know, he brings the audience in. And if you have an actor, however brilliant he might be, he doesn't have the quality that the star has, which is just to attract audiences into the cinema.
Is this why today, when one looks at the world of cinema internationally, it's Iranian cinema that seems to have a cutting edge? Indian cinema seems to have, in a sense, drawn in its horns and blunted itself.
Well, you see, Iranian cinema, the situation is slightly different. It doesn't have the traditions of the Indian cinema. It doesn't have the same kind of traditions.
It's newer for a start.
It is newer for a start, and it's also had a lot of influence of neorealism, you know, the
Indian cinema
realistic
has
traditions.
a baggage to carry with it.
Indian
History
cinema
and
has a
tradition.
huge historical baggage to carry.
But has it very
doesn't come only
quickly
from-
lost some of its cutting edge in the last decade?
I think it has, to a large extent, lost some of the cutting edge, which it did have, even traditional cinema had, let us say, in the 50s.
But I suppose that was inevitable.
That was inevitable, that was bound to happen, but interesting things are happening now with young filmmakers coming in, and particularly the post, you know, the multiplexes and so on and so forth.
There is always a future. When the sun sets on one, it rises on another.
Absolutely.
Shyam Benegal, a pleasure talking to you.